So, am I audible?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Perfect. Okay. So, I hope everybody is back for our final session, which is the closing keynote address. And this session will be chaired by Prakash Padakanya, who is a professor of psychology at Christ University, Bangalore. His research interests include reading, dyslexia, language, and cognition among pre-literate, literate, and illiterate populations. He's a recipient of many prestigious fellowships, including a Japanese government fellowship, a Fulbright postdoctoral fellowship from the Texas A&M University in the US, a Fulbright Senior Scholar Fellowship, Haskins Laboratories, Yale University in the US, an Erasmus Mundus Visiting Scholar Fellowship at the University of Potsdam, Germany, among others. He is an elected fellow of the Association for Psychological Science in the US and the National Academy of Psychology, India. He is the editor in chief of the Journal of Cultural Cognitive Science, Springer Nature Group of Publishers, and associate editor of Psychological Studies, which is also a Springer publication. All right, so without delaying any further, over to you.
Thank you, Ashmita. Yep.
Will you be saying a few words, Prakash, or should I start? Sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry, I thought, like say it was by the organizers and well, like I didn't know. So I mean, know
That's
that.
fine.
Yeah, I mean, let me, take this opportunity, of speaking for 2 minutes. And I welcome, like you all, for the last session and where, like say we would have a keynote address by Professor Giridhar Rao. And that's, I think, like I must at the onset, like I also should thank the university, Ashoka University, and especially Dr. Kanika Singh, who is unfortunately who is not been able to be present today. And also like and also I feel that, and I'm honored to chair, like the session with Dr. Giridhar Rao. And I'm, let's say, I think the session is like for one hour, and then the presentation will be around 40 minutes. Then followed by the observations and questions, Q&A, and also discussions. And hope like say all of you have a good time now. Yeah, good session. Thank you. I invite Dr. Giridhar now.
Thank you, Dr. Prakash. Thank you very much, Ashoka University. It has felt these last 2 days like a homecoming, to listen to so many engaged practitioners worrying with the students' well-being, intellectual well-being at the center of their worry. Not anything else, but as EAP teachers. Notice I said teachers, not mediators, facilitators, or any of those words. So I'm really, really glad that I attended these last 2 days of listening to so many people's ideas and so many details. So much, both at the level of plan and at the level of detail of the thinking behind the EAP initiatives, as well as the nitty-gritty nuts and bolts of it. My talk is not going to be about what we are doing at Azim Premji University, but trying to zoom out and trying to make a proposal or set of proposals about the centrality of reading in the EAP enterprise, as well as making EAP somehow a multilingual enterprise for us in India. One of the difficulties, one of the challenges was a mixed audience, not just of fellow professionals, or many of whom are thoroughly familiar with the work I'm going to touch upon, but also students and others who might be listening in. Well, let us see. So please indulge me if I'm saying some fairly obvious things. The title, Hooked on Books, is from Stephen Krashen's work, which I'm sure many of you are quite thoroughly familiar with. So I'll keep coming back to Krashen and his colleagues, the work that they've done about the centrality of reading for pleasure, which is the basic proposal I'm putting forward for this. So for the next 35 minutes, let me start the timer and maybe share my screen if that's possible.
Yeah, you should be able to share it from.
Yeah, I'm doing that. Yeah, we are a Zoom university as well, so this should not be unfamiliar to me after so many months of online teaching. So yes, I'll quickly begin with my frames of reference. Once again, names of critical social linguists, indicative names, and I'm sure many of you know most of these names anyhow. A brief slide on two, maybe on the university, and the third slide on Esperanto, which is my other passion, so to speak, as a frame of reference for what I'm going to say. As I said, the reading for pleasure hypothesis comes from Krashen's work, Stephen Krashen's work, so we'll return to that. We'll look at it through a case study of Willy published a couple of years ago. Time permitting, what about writing? What does Krashen have to say about it, or Krashen and colleagues have to say about it? And finally, a couple of initiatives which might take us towards thinking about English in India in a multilingual way, a translations initiative from Azim Premji University, and a brief look at overview of what the National Translation Mission has been doing. We'll end with a poem, The Quiet World by Jeffrey McDaniel, which sort of encapsulates in a slightly dystopian way, perhaps, our current moment. As many people have remarked, the critical thinking is the critical component of what we are trying to do. And only academic language skills or English language skills are finally something that will support the primary goal of critical thinking. An obvious corollary is that such skills of critical thinking are best developed in the strongest language, mother language, home language, whatever you wish to call it, strongest language, one's strongest language, certainly. And a second part of that thesis is that reading for pleasure contributes a great deal towards the development of these critical skills. And the interesting finding seems to be that these are transferable skills, and they include academic language skills. As far as the EAP is concerned, specifically, Krashen and others strongly recommend revision as a major way of making you smarter, a phrase he uses often, and written corrective feedback as contributing towards that enterprise of making one smarter. The first frame of reference, as I said, are these critical social linguists of various kinds, of various subdisciplines or disciplines. FLA, first language acquisition and second language acquisition scholars such as Cummins, who speaks about BICS and CALP, the playground language and the classroom language, if you like. Common underlying proficiency, which allows you to draw upon your other languages in exercising your academic skills, and an interdependence hypothesis of languages coming together as a single speaker who incorporates multiple languages, a very familiar idea to us in India. Critical literacy scholars who examine the link between the word and the world, as Freire calls it, Rosenblatt, Bernstein, my colleague Shailaja Menon, and Hilary Janks, just indicative names of people who populate my universe. Indigenous education in India, scholars such as Ajit Mohanty, Minati Panda, Giridhar, scholars, practitioners, researchers, right? a more general zooming out picture of English in India, Annamalai, Prabal Das Gupta, Ramakant Agnihotri, and even larger global frame of reference, a couple of indicative names, Tove Skutnap Kangas and Robert Phillipson. So this was my first frame of reference. The second is my university, the Azim Premji University, which has an explicit social vision of working towards building a just, equitable, sustainable, and humane society. Enterprises that are closely linked to our constitutional values, and much that I have been listening to in the last couple of days from friends in this conference. This results in a university with a policy of deliberate diversity, since the funding for the university comes largely from the Azim Premji Foundation. So student intake does not depend on ability to pay. And one result of that in the 2020 cohort is, for example, 49% of the students were from rural India or small towns from 26 states in India, and 60%, as many as that, were women students at the university. This is accompanied, so they are quite, the students are quite conscious about the diversity that the university, that their cohort represents. I enforced or emphasize that in my courses through a language audit. So for example, in 2019, in a course with 46 students, there were as many as 36 language names from Assamese and Bhojpuri through Gondi, Konkani, and Malayalam to Tulu and Urdu. And as Jyotirmoy was saying yesterday, a language hierarchy emerges. The first mentioned languages almost inevitably are the Schedule 8 languages of the Constitution of India, and followed by the major other non-scheduled languages, maybe Bhojpuri, for example. And only last, reluctantly, somewhat hesitantly, Adivasi languages, indigenous languages, tribal languages, name them how you will, emerge as in that listing. So students realize that there is a language hierarchy, a language and power dynamic, which is part of even an exercise such as simply listing language names. My third frame of reference is Esperanto, the language that was designed as an international help language, auxiliary language. I have a 15-minute YouTube video, but you might like to look at that or watch that at some point, which sort of gives an overview of what it is, the impulse behind it, and what it looks like, the community looks like. For our purposes here, I'd like to draw your attention to the Prague Manifesto, 1996 document, and the 7 themes that it briefly mentions as somewhat central to the enterprise. And you can, I'm sure, recognize and resonate. I'm sure some of them resonate with you as well. Linguistic democracy, transnational education, pedagogical efficacy or efficiency, multilingualism, linguistic rights, linguistic diversity, and a much larger goal of education in general, emancipation. So that is where, those are my three frames of reference. I'd like to move to the hypotheses that underlie Krashen and his colleagues' works, which undergird the centrality of reading for pleasure as crucial to developing language skills. Natural language acquisition, not learning, is one of his hypotheses. So this is just a subset of some others, but relevant to our enterprise. Comprehensible, compelling input leads to massive amounts of motivation, obviously. Free, voluntary, self-selected reading, a crucial part of his thesis and their thesis, the group. Moreover, interestingly and crucially for our purposes, these are transferable skills. The conduit hypothesis, he calls it, that skills acquired during reading for pleasure are skills that come in critically useful in academic contexts as well. So sdkrashen.com, a lot of his material is available there, free, and he's a great proponent of open source publishing and research. So a man after my heart. A case study quickly that will take us through what he's talking about, what they're talking about. This is from Renandya 2019, published in a magazine published by University, Language and Language Teaching. It's on the website. You're welcome to download it. The initial reading of Willy Renandya, who is the primary author of this, co-authored with Krashen and a couple of others. The initial reading of Renandya, who's from Indonesia, was in Indonesian. And what did he read as a child? Of course, he read what children read, favorites like comics, series novels, not any serious fiction, no non-fiction, no newspapers, not even newspapers. All that came much later. Only kung fu novels. I like him. Fighting, love, friendship, hatred, loyalty, and betrayal. These were the themes of those kung fu novels. But he read them in Bahasa, in Indonesian, Bahasa Indonesia, right? 6 years of high school, 6 years of English in high school, a familiar Indian story, almost non-functional English. In other words, English was never used for any meaningful communication, neither orally nor in writing, right? Quite a familiar story. Umesh has been talking about this as well. He joined an English teacher training college because good job prospects. Now, why does this sound familiar? And quite by accident, he says. I mean, he was as surprised as anyone else that he got in. But he came in clearly with the English deficit, shall we say. So the college had a reading library which stocked simplified classics, David Copperfield, Moby Dick. They were supposed to read them, these students with English difficulties, and read them and write book reports. On both counts, this was a very boring course. The book reports were further burdensome things that had to be done with the course outline. So he loses interest pretty quickly, Willy Renandya. But one day, let's say on April 24th, his life changes. He walks into a local bookshop and he discovers a bunch of novels, Perry Mason novels. The non-dinosaurs among you will probably need to be told that these were US detective novels by Earl Stanley Gardner, who died in 1970. He wrote as many as 80 these murder trial novels, the Perry Mason series. Perry Mason is the detective, and these were with covers such as this. Alas, I don't have flowers in my presentation, but maybe these two will do. Look at the covers, full of drama, full of stories. The case of the velvet claws, the case of the lonely heiress, right? And things are happening. These are covers that these are books you will want to read, at least pull off the shelf and have a look at them, right? So great covers, racy stories, plenty of dialogue, informal contemporary English, right? Also, because these are medical thrillers, murders and trials in the court, pretty much every novel ends with a court scene, right? So there's medical and legal English as well. So you're getting formal English as well, but all this in the format of a thriller. So he finished his first novel within hours, and this was the first novel he read entirely by himself. So the sense of achievement and pride must have been enormous. There were initial issues, of course, new vocabulary, cultural vocabulary, medical, legal, all unfamiliar. Remember, he's been reading in Indonesian, right? New expressions, US English, right? But 5 books later, he understood almost everything, and eventually ended up reading something like 50 of those 80 Perry Mason novels. So an example of what the case study also calls narrow reading. We'll come to that. Then he moved to other books, other novels, Sherlock Holmes, Agatha Christie, other writers, other characters, related but different, more complex, and so on, right? Meanwhile, the classmates who now constitute in this case study the control group continued with the English department reading library. On Willy's language proficiency, this reading had a huge impact. When he joined, he was at the bottom of the class, and very pretty much there. And he graduates with among the top, at the top, with the highest GPA. So there's no other explanation. He didn't go and spend 6 months in an English speaking country. He had no relatives sending him books from the United States or wherever. He didn't go to immersion classes. Then this was all he did. And our friends were completely puzzled, of course, where he got this. How did he become a first-class student in this, a good student in this course? And he didn't have an explanation either until he went on to do graduate studies in education, and he now teaches in the education department in Singapore. A trajectory that only later revealed to him that this must have been the explanation, this reading for pleasure. So the lessons we can draw from these are multiple, several. Here are some. The material was self-selected. Willy chose the material, right? Free voluntary reading. This was stuff that he read on by himself, right? No book reports, no questions, reading at your own pace, no deadlines, and don't finish a book if you don't like it or come back to it later. Excellent advice in terms of keeping the pleasure going of reading for oneself. High literature is certainly not necessary. No Moby Dick, no David Copperfield, right? Comics, detectives, bestsellers. And in our context, well, only Sherlock Holmes, only Chetan Bhagat, no problem is what the case study seems to indicate, right? So the snobbery of high literature is probably doing more harm than good. And further, the fear is also misplaced because the free voluntary reader often moves to more complex material, again, while reading for pleasure. And the completely unexpected part was the enormous benefit of transfer to academic skills. Remember, he graduated in teacher training, so courses on child development, child psychology, all the usual pedagogy and curriculum courses, all those he aced through the 3 years. It takes time, yeah. This is a crucial thing, and this is crucial for our context also. We don't have time, but if it is possible, certainly Krashen is saying something like 12 months of sustained reading of reading for pleasure, and it does not need to be long sessions, binge sessions, but even shorter ones. So making space in the curriculum or in the life of the learner for silent sustained reading, as the literature calls it, may be a pretty good enabler of such a practice, right? Notice something that the case study does not tell us or does not dwell upon, but we know that he was already a proficient reader in his own language, right? Remember those Kung Fu novels, right? So a range of higher order thinking skills or higher complex reading skills are already in place in Willy's reading practices, right? What we do need for such something like this to work is masses of graded reading material. For English, that may be relatively easy to acquire. There is a lot of material for Spanish and French as well. But for our languages, I'm not so sure what is available, how we can go about it. But if the case study is any indication, we had perhaps be thinking about it in our EAP practices, right? The self-selected fiction that Willy enjoyed so much, the research is not just this case study. As the bottom says, the Krashen in 2020 article in the newsletter on his website, the Catasol newsletter, cites this, a summary of this research, which I'm just presenting here, that the vocabulary size was biggest among fiction learners, fiction readers, less in non-fiction readers, and least in non-fiction readers, non-readers, sorry. Yeah, so there is a clear spectrum, it looks like. Further, self-selected reading is better than assigned reading for vocabulary gain, something that we constantly worry about as teachers, right? Further, the academic knowledge of history, literature, science, all these were much greater in readers rather than non-readers. A further piece of evidence, summary of other studies of 22 young reader novels. These contained 85% of the words on an academic vocabulary list in the United States, right? Another study shows something like 1 year's pleasure reading of science fiction. The reader encounters nearly all the science words in another academic vocabulary list, right? A third piece of research shows that over 90% of the academic vocabulary in high school textbooks is available in these 5,000 contemporary novels. So it seems like there is a considerable overlap, much more than we had earlier thought, or I had thought, in reading for pleasure and its consequences for academic skills. Right, here's my colorful chart showing an arc showing this, the benefits of free voluntary reading, from love of reading to world knowledge, vocabulary, spelling, grammar, writing style, reading comprehension, and knowledge of genres and so on. A sort of what I call a Chavanprash slide, which shows how effective and efficacious free voluntary reading is. Do I have time? Yeah. Writing, he has some excellent advice on writing as well. It is not as if that is dismissed out of hand. I would like you to go to eventually to this YouTube video that he has, a talk at University of Southern California called Secrets of Writing, where he has a whole bunch of advice on how writing, what works as writing, what feeds into writing, and so on. So I will not spend time on this, just to say that there's a lot of good advice on writing in this talk, right? Reworking, delaying editing, the idea of incubation, let it simmer in the background, daily regular writing, lots of good advice. And he is a really entertaining presenter and speaker as well. So that's a plus, that's a benefit. A couple of multilingual initiatives I'd like to mention to make the university, the higher education space, both multilingual and multi-local. Notice that the NEP 2020, the National Education Policy, mentions an Indian Institute of Translation and Interpretation, which is an initiative that which speaks about making the HEI, the higher education institutes, both multilingual and multi-local. Some of that work is already being done in multiple places, I'm sure. I have a couple of initiatives to quickly offer as worth paying attention to. A translation initiative at the Azim Premji University, which is nearly finished translating all the core readings in our foundation courses in the MA program into Kannada and Hindi to start with. These are the two large language groups, and since we are located in Karnataka anyway, there's that aspect to it as well, right? This has involved creating a network of translators, using already available networks of translators, and sharing texts and readings, so that translators also become quality control of second readers of each other's translations, so that accuracy and readability are both, as far as possible, maintained, right? This is a kind of prelude to eventually having a university in multiple locations, an Azim Premji University campus in other places in the country, and hopefully those will be universities where teaching also possibly, we envision that it would be a bilingual teaching methodology or teaching pedagogic practices. The second multilingual initiative towards multilingualism in higher education is that of the National Translation Mission, currently housed in the Central Institute of Indian Languages in Mysuru, which has been doing quite a lot of remarkable work. In fact, it's surprising that the NAP 2020 does not refer to the NTM at all, considering that much of the thrust of the NAP 2020's focus on multilingual higher education is work that the NTM is already doing. It has identified 69 chief domains, as they call them, in which knowledge texts have been identified. The domains range from adult and continuing education and anthropology, through linguistics and management, to women's studies and zoology general. A range of nearly 70 areas in which textbooks, UGC approved textbooks are already approved textbooks are taken, and translated into all the 22 scheduled languages, all the scheduled languages of India. The massive project, as you can imagine, of making available foundational texts for undergraduate education, especially focusing on undergraduate education, recommended textbooks, and identifying translators with a rolling project, rolling workshop, series of workshops now on hold thanks to the pandemic. Series of workshops where people interested are invited to come and attend a 3-week workshop on their area of interest. I'm interested in chemistry, as the previous speaker was saying. So chemistry and a chemistry textbook, yes, I'm willing to translate from Marathi to English or whatever, right? English to Marathi, beg your pardon. And in that workshop, I get some general understanding about translation strategies and so on. But I also work with already experienced translators from English to Marathi and become a part of that network. So it's been thought through quite carefully, the entire process of building a body of such professionals who can help with who can contribute to the project. 60 plus such translations have already been published, so this is not something that's happening sometime in the future. Here are some of the books, some of the textbooks already published in Dogri and Telugu, Hindi, Kannada, Maithili, Kannada, Malayalam, Bodo, and Urdu, in social sciences, psychology, molecular physics, and mathematical analysis, mathematics. These are books already available from NTM, from the project itself. I have the details are in my August 2020 post on my blog, Willy. You might like to visit that at some point and take a look at the details. Some of you may have been part of the initiative already. Others may be interested in contributing to this. If there is nation building, I think this is part of that nation building, right? So the implications for our enterprise, coming to the end of my presentation, the implications, some of them are clear from what I've said, right? Reading for pleasure is central. Writing and feedback on writing, however it is organized, it makes you smarter as a writer. Just the revision, just the act of revising your thoughts and reworking them makes you a better thinker, improves critical skills and so on. Again, I'm preaching to the choir. The interesting, I think, extension of English in India has to be that it has to take on board our multilingual reality, the title of Ajit Mohanty's 2020 book, the multilingual reality that we inhabit. And we need to take that on board for a variety of reasons. First of all, it is a extremely important resource that we are squandering if we do not take on board. And secondly, as a general part of decolonizing the mind, if you like, right? Ngugi's famous phrase, part of the project of decolonizing the mind, English needs to be relativized, as Ngugi famously argued, right? It is a language, it is one of the more important languages, but it is one more important language among the multiple important languages that constitute our reality in India. So I think that is about the kind of zooming out ideas that I wanted to share. I'll end with a poem for our times, which kind of encapsulates as I said, in a slightly dystopian way, the ideas of language, the intimate nature of language, identity, and perhaps state power and surveillance. So let me stop with that and switch to the poem itself. It's called The Quiet World. A contemporary American poet whom I did not know much about, Jeffrey McDaniel, who writes in the 90s, right? The Quiet World. in an effort to get people to look into each other's eyes more, and also to appease the mutes. The government has decided to allot each person exactly 167 words per day. When the phone rings, I put it to my ear without saying hello. In the restaurant, I point at chicken noodle soup. I'm adjusting well to the new way. Late at night, I call my long-distance lover, proudly say, I only used 59 today. I saved the rest for you. When she doesn't respond, I know she's used up all her words. So I slowly whisper, I love you, 32 1/3 times. After that, we just sit on the line and listen to each other breathe. Thank you. Questions, comments?
Okay.
Or was the poem that moving?
Yeah, I actually, you had, like, you took just, about 30 minutes probably, less than, what is given to you. Yeah. Yeah, I think, like, say, again, like, I must, I thoroughly enjoyed Dr. Giridhar's presentation. It was something like, say, totally, I mean, I did not know like what was going to come. And I feel that, like, taken the theme of the conference to a different level and, a new, different, and very, I think, like, say, a level which makes us, like, say, to think a lot. I'm sure, like, say, many of you, like, say, must be wondering, like, say, I mean, with a lot of questions, a lot of, like, some kind of, like, ideas, to share with, or, like, say, to get opinion, like, say, remarks from Dr. Giridhar. And I was told that, like, say, I could take, I could speak first, give my comments, but I think, like, I reserve it, like, till the end. Maybe there are good questions, like, say, from the audience. And then, I will add one or two, like, say, if it is not covered by other questions. Okay. Now it's like a paper or, presentation is open for discussion. And it's an open house. There's, anybody, anything. There is no bad questions or anything like that. Only answer could be, a bit sometimes limited. Yeah. Okay. Is it okay, Shweta? Yeah. I think, like, I see, like, say, Balumi raising her hand. Please, like, go ahead with the question.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor. It was lovely. Like, it was so much of unpacking of lots of readings that I would like to do later. Thank you so much for this enlightenment. Just a little problem that I don't know how to tackle in my classes, and I think you can help me from your experience. This thing called reading for pleasure. With technology overpowering us before we know we are being overpowered by us, like that, the newer generation, even more, we are already lost, and we've lost our path. Like, I have to detox every day for 2 hours, consciously keep my phone away and not read it, because that's not conscious reading. So in this, and because most of us are adult, we teach to adult learners. So with this general apathy to reading in particular, how do we, sometimes I don't even know, maybe I'm not the right person, because I myself have not done pleasure reading the way I used to do in my schools anymore that much now. Because, so And school students nowadays do it much less than what used to do. I still remember my diet of Nancy Drew and Famous Five, because those were the books that were available in my school, and Tintin and all of that. But if I go to ask students nowadays, they won't visit libraries, even their school libraries, even lesser. And I'm particularly talking from a very personal point of view. My brother, he reads a lot less. And no matter how much I tell him how important it is to read, he would better play video games. He will better chat on WhatsApp. He'll better create an Instagram post rather than go back and read. So how to tackle this gradual apathy? It's good. We know that reading helps. Pleasure reading definitely helps. But there has to be certain ways of scaffolding this thing within our discussions and conversations with the adult generation. I'm making it particular because I don't teach children that much. So how do, even in my classrooms, like Chetan Bhagat and that story is completely relatable, sir. When I taught to BTech students, when I asked them in the first 1 or 2 classes in the ice-breaking sessions, what was the last book they read, or what was anything they remember about reading, the name that came up, 98% was Chetan Bhagat. And it was appalling, but at the same time, I thought it was better than nothing.
Yeah.
And, it was better than nothing.
Yeah.
So can you please answer that, sir?
May I respond, or would you rather, Prakash, that I waited for a couple more questions? Whatever you say.
No, I think, like I say, you can respond right away.
Okay. It's not appalling. If that is what you got from my talk, IO, as we say in South India. No, the idea is that reading for pleasure is good. It has unexpected benefits. So the universe of available material needs to be larger than Chetan Bhagat. And that is something, an institutional responsibility. The institutional responsibility also includes, at least at the school level, the research shows a period of silent, sustained reading where reading for pleasure is happening, but it is set aside in the timetable. There are studies to show Japanese students who did SSR, silent, sustained reading, outperforming a control group that did not, on vocabulary gains, on a whole range of language acquisition metrics. So those are very much part of that. So institutionally, we need to think about this. You mentioned guided reading in an earlier session, and those guided reading sessions are really valuable. But they should not take the place of reading for pleasure to start with. Thereafter, the guided reading sessions are really valuable because they are valuable language use sessions, especially after an initial shyness has come down in the group. They're really valuable for adult readers as well. So I would say this, that we need to institutionally arrange that there is such space available as part of the language acquisition enterprise that we are all engaged in. I see a question from Nirav.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Perfectly.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I have a sketchy connection and keep on logging in and out, so I'm sorry I can't switch my video on. My question is, I really enjoyed your talk, Dr. Giridhar, and for me, the interesting thing was the very phrase that you used, reading for pleasure. And I think the interesting word there, of course, is pleasure. As in, what do we understand when we say the word pleasure? Where, of course, when you talk about reading for pleasure, of course, we're talking about, certain pressures taking a back seat, or the idea that you'll be judged taking a back seat, or the grading system flying out of the window. So my question to you is primarily with respect to not just our approaching reading for pleasure, but also how is it that we think about teaching for pleasure? And I'm going back to one of the concerns raised in the sessions yesterday, where we were trying to get at this kind of structures thanks to which we operate in a certain fashion within the universities we are working in. And a quick example for me would be that being an ad hoc teacher earlier, before I joined Ashoka at DU, one of the main problems I always faced was that before or by the time I managed to establish a connection with a certain batch of students, by the time they understood me and I understood them, I lost my job. So in that sense, how do we then think about pleasure in that sense? Yeah.
Excellent. Jyotirmoy, do you have a connected question? If so, we can take that. Otherwise, I'll respond to this.
Yeah, it's actually connected. It's a question. Also, I think it's relevant to what we are discussing right now, which is reading for pleasure, or your presentation, which is of course fascinating, and how actually one probably ends up learning English, not always in the way in which the teachers intended to, or not through the grammar books, or not through the English language classroom sometimes, right? So actually, and like I really want to share this. This also came up yesterday when we were in the round table, and Nancy was actually explaining how I have used this technique of just taking things out of their area of interest itself. So if a student was interested in football, I just asked him to watch more and more football with English commentary switched on, because he could choose the language commentary for some matches, right? And in fact, that's how I actually learned English. Just also taking borrowing from your presentation. Also, when I learned English very late in my life, and English was used practically for no purposes around me, except in that one class of the 7 classes. So science, social sciences, SMEs, Sanskrit, English was one of the subjects. So outside of the classroom, I basically had no English. Like my parents are multilingual, so they don't speak English. And I learned in those classes much less before I actually got interested in watching the TV and watching the World Cup. I remember 2003 World Cup, for example, in cricket, and India went up to the finals. And in those, while watching those matches and trying to understand what's happening in the game, and Sanjay Manjrekar speaking, Harsha Bhogle speaking, right? That's where I picked up. Okay, this is how you are supposed to speak. This is how you are supposed to say a word or say a language. Maybe, for those of you who are familiar with SMEs, you would know in SMEs pronunciation, for example, CH is equal to SH is equal to S is equal to C. It's all saw. So you go to a doctor's chamber and not a doctor's chamber in SMEs. So it's when actually I was interested, I got interested and hooked to cricket and wanted to understand what's happening in that game, and would therefore try to understand what Sanjay Manjrekar is saying or what Harsha Bhogle is saying, is how I picked it up much faster than I would in my grammar class in my school. So that is something that has actually helped me really well, and that's something I, to some degree of success, also have found myself using in the Ashoka classroom. So I just wanted to add that. I have one question, if it's time for.
Let me just respond to this. What you have just said. This areas of interest idea and teaching for pleasure, which Nirav spoke about earlier. Excellent. Both are absolutely spot on, I think. For the last couple of years, the university, some of us in the university, as in Premji University, have been working with the Telangana Education Department, SCRT in Telangana, in order to prepare teachers to start to migrate to teaching in English, all subjects, primary school teachers to start with. A massive project, as you can imagine. And the entire exercise has been designed for teaching, for reading for pleasure for teachers themselves to start with. So precisely that, the teaching with pleasure will come, in our case, it seemed evident to us, only if the teachers rediscover the pleasure they had, that Ptolemy was talking about, the pleasure that they once had as readers, that the exigencies of work and career have more or less completely strangled and killed off. So how to discover that? So the entire program was designed so that we go to their areas of interest. And they can be range from anything from voyages to nature, to sports, to cooking, to anything, just about anything. And design modules around those. It, at least as an approach, as a pedagogic approach of bringing down what Krashen calls the affective filter, the anxiety levels of using English, performing in English. Those levels have certainly, I think, significantly dropped among teachers who are professionals, who've been teaching for years now, except they were doing so in Telugu, which is obvious, right? This is the government school system we're talking about. So in these strange times, strange for multiple reasons, perhaps rediscovering pleasure should be a part of our way of thinking. I see a couple of more hands. Jyotirmoy, you wanted to ask something else, but Umesh had raised his hand before that. So may I invite Umesh and then?
Sir, thanks a lot. I could not agree with you more, and your lecture was, sir, awesome. And the poem, the way you recited, it inspires. Sir, I have one kind of question. It's, I think, more philosophical than related to this discipline. But then, sir, the idea of English studies in India, it's only something that has started for 100 years, not more than that. Across the world also, this discipline has started not more than 100 years. And this came as a means of teaching people language, and including the best of literature available to them was one of the means. But the moment that which we call canon today became part of a syllabus, then that syllabus became difficult for students and they started ignoring the syllabus. And we have a course I want to bring in, something that is an intersection between pleasure reading and our syllabus reading, that is popular literature, that is offered to students of BA and MA students, and it's also a general elective courses for other students. Now, the books that we read generally for pleasure, like that of Chetan Bhagat or Agatha Christie, they are the authors that are listed in that course. But then the very students who enjoy reading them outside the syllabus, the moment they have to read that as a part of the curriculum, then I found that there is a kind of resistance. So, I mean, something that is psychological. So is it like this double bind of the system that perhaps you're not capable to ever erode, that the moment you start stressing that, okay, this is the book that will give you pleasure, or this is the book, let me include that in my canon, that is the moment the student will lose interest, because they are kind of drawn to anything that is outside the syllabus. It may or may not be, difficult or easy for them to grasp, but the moment you put that in the syllabus, then do we as English teachers lose the grip of students, and the pleasure is somehow taken away the moment that becomes utilitarian? I don't know whether it would amount to a instructional question, but I just wanted to say, sir, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. Schooling as misery has a long history, as you know. So the moment it becomes official, so to speak, it becomes painful as well. So among Krashen's strong recommendations is that these texts not be tested on, because he says that ruins the entire focus of the enterprise. So if those books are actually brought in, the consequences of such reading are visible in other places, such as in Willy Renandia's case of higher performance in other courses. And those are measurable, and those are part of the structure and so on. So perhaps separating the two, schooling is not necessarily, and the classroom is certainly not the place for pleasure, not in India, perhaps not anywhere in the world if anthropologists are to be believed. So perhaps separating the two is probably a good idea. Jyotirmoy, how are we doing for time? I don't know.
Yeah, I think, like it's fine. We have still, I think we can, since there are quite in like
we started 10 minutes late.
Yeah. Yes, I think we can continue.
So, Jyotirmoy, would you like to?
Yeah. So yeah, I had actually, you had mentioned the multilingual classroom. This is something that I sort of also am really interested in understanding, because all our classrooms are multilingual, right? And also separately, you had discussed translation as well, and translation process, right? So I just wanted to understand if you think, whether you think like I want sort of advice or suggestion, or what you feel about bringing the activity of translation or engaging the students in maybe translating things that they're very interested in, or songs they, something as interesting and something they listen to for pleasure, let's say, or read for pleasure. If there's a classroom activity where, say, we ask them to listen to anything, any song in their mother tongue, say Haryanvi. I'm again, Ashoka is in Haryana, so let's say in Haryanvi, in whatever language, in Bengali, in Assamese, and then translate it. And you want to sing the song, sing it as well, or also in English, try to tell us what the song means or what is it about. So how effective would you think something like that be as an exercise in English or in
Thank you. Lovely question. Among the pleasures in the last couple of days has been listening to so many creative pedagogic strategies. that so many of you have been practicing in far more rigorously than I have been. So on the face of it, this sounds really fascinating and a wonderful way of getting into the process of writing. I certainly try it out in my classes of Hindi film songs or Malayalam film songs. The process of translation itself has metacognitive benefits, metalingual benefits of reflecting on structural differences and so on. So that seems to be a really worthwhile way to build into our EAP programs. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's a
Sanju?
question from Shweta Kumari.
Not a question. I was just writing my comments as the conversation by, and we were talking about, you know, what we read as pleasure and what we read, and I could see some patterns, and also I think gender does play a role. I speak to men, you know, what do they read? They read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. They read motivational. They read how to make more money. They read how to succeed more in career. And when we want to talk anything about life, art, literature, women's issues, feminism, caste, they have nothing because they don't read. So I feel like also built into our, you know, gender norms, social structures, expectations of masculinity and femininity, versus the women read everything about the rape culture, the harassment, the literature, the, you know, so it's also very, I think that plays a role. Also school systems, I went to Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalaya. In 11th grade, they will not lend you anything that is, you know, Sarath Chandra or anything, because only science, because that matter. So, you know, that's something also, the reading for pleasure, someone needs to really tell them that reading for pleasure is not a waste of time. It's also, you are investing in your personality, etc., etc. So just wanted to go in there.
Thank you. Shanjuti has a...
Who has any other comments?
Yes, I see a hand. Please go ahead, Sanjuti.
Yep.
Am I audible?
Perfectly.
Yep. Yes.
Thanks, Giridhar, for that wonderful presentation. I don't have a background in education, and at CWC, I'm not a part of the language teaching team. But I do take an interest in, you know, being accessible to students whose first language, of course, even if it's not in English, but they still think that their native language is inadequate, and not being able to reach the target language is something, is a bit of a struggle, in the sense that it affects their mental health as well. Because during my consultations, one-to-one consultations, I do get students who are really upset to the point of being depressed, that they are not being able to be articulate, they're not being fully articulate in writing critically in English. Whereas critical thinking need not necessarily be in English, they can think critically in their own language as well. So I don't have a very fully articulated question, but when you see that, you know, there is a debate already going on, that is creative writing critical. So in the same vein, is pleasure not critical enough, or do you think, or do we think that reading for pleasure does not hone our critical thinking abilities? So when students are in, whenever students read for pleasure, I mean, at the level of institution, I mean, the institution may make them feel that it's not good use of their time because it's not critical enough, because pleasure is not critical. So for example, the way I would watch a film for pleasure is not the same way I would watch a film as a text. So in that way, and when you also say that, you know, the intervention has to be at the level of the institution, in the sense to, you know, instill in the students that pleasure reading is critical, and it does hone critical thinking abilities. And you also mentioned translation studies, Institute for Translation Studies, as a pathway. I was also keen on thinking that we also lack certain educations in our school curriculum, like mental health education. So, you know, do you think that when institutions need to intervene at the level of, say, instilling, you know, a critical sensibilities towards pleasure reading, then do you think that other education can complement this process, like mental health education? As you also said, that Institute for Translation Studies is also one of those mechanisms that a network of mechanisms that can be put together in place to uh, mm, uh, think of pleasure as critical enough. And if that question makes sense, it's very related and like all over the.
No, no, thank you. There are multiple things happening in what you said. As far as reading, considering Indian languages or our own languages are not as carriers of knowledge, this is an unfortunate side effect of this Englishness of our education system, right? My colleague Nisha and I are teaching this semester a course called Teaching English Language in India to our MA education as part of the MA education program. And one of the exercises, one of the assignments we have given is for students to take proverbs from their own languages and in a framework of linguistic analysis, talk about how complex, how complex cultural texts, how they function as complex cultural texts, navigating dynamics of sound to power, power in society. And one of the amazing byproducts of that is that perhaps for the first time in their higher education, they're going back to their own languages, in fact, their grandmothers, and asking for proverbs that they have long forgotten. And the grandmother is equally amused that, do you think something like this, oh, I do have something to contribute to your modernity, do I? I see, interesting. So, assignments like that valorize, that validate the multilingual nature of the learner, of the student. I think those go away some way in keeping an ecosystem, linguistic ecosystem, relatively stable and healthy. Otherwise, there is a huge monoculture overwhelming us and overwhelming people with low self-esteem about their own languages, about the uselessness of their own languages. So something like that may be one way of thinking about validation of our own cultural background resources that we come with. As far as the mental health perspective is concerned, I completely agree that that is a major concern. And I was wondering if among the range of interests that learners have, adult learners in our program, surely that must be one of the areas of interest. So assembling material for such pleasure reading, curating it, may be an important part of how we present English for academic purposes. So it does not have to be a Perry Mason novel alone, right? Or a Chetan Bhagat novel alone. Much else is part of our universe. And I'm sure that such material will go some way in combining these ideas of language acquisition as well as doing so through reading for pleasure. Yeah, pleasure itself is a complex idea.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other comments? Anybody? Yeah, if there is nothing, I think maybe we have come to a end of the wonderful session actually. And before concluding, like say before handing it over to the organizers, I just want to maybe like I may add very briefly, let's say some thing. I mean, I hope it will be complementary to whatever like has been discussed now. And then in fact, Dr. Giridhar Rao has actually touched upon like say quite a few things like in the discussion with respect to the relevance like of what what we discussed to English as as an English for academic purpose kind of framework. So one thing, like say, where everybody was talking about, like say, reading for pleasure. I mean, this is a thing, like what we have been really talking, and it's actually like, let me put it, like because I mean, I just probably adding a little more, some more what terms, and like in psychology we call it like say, intrinsic motivation. I mean, like say you like it, like say. I mean, you will like something, like if the motivation comes, like from inside, and like say whatever, like otherwise, like say, like somebody, I think Umesh or, like say, mentioned, that if it is for examination, like say, it's a very good novel outside, you would enjoy it. But if it is, like say, the textbook, like say, you would not, enjoy it or, relish the, thing the same way, because, like then, like say, because, it's examination. If you read it for examination, then it becomes in an external kind of thing, like say, or cause or reason. Then, like say, like obviously reading for pleasure may become, reading for pressure, not pleasure. Pleasure may become, like say, pressure. And the other thing, like say, what I would like to say again, like it's whatever, like say, Professor Rao has, like say, mentioned, like it's scientifically, like say, I mean, there's a lot of, like say, studies, which, really support, those kind of views. And like again, like say, that happens, like say, when you read for pleasure, like learning, like happens, just automatically, unconsciously, what we call again, something like when we call latent learning. You're not actually aware of, like say, what you're really consciously learning. The other thing, like say, I just would like to, like add, is reading for pleasure comes, like say, um, well, I mean, comes at a stage, of course, like the early schooling kind of thing. But then reading, like say, since I work in the area of reading, I'm just saying. So one of the premises, a basic, premise is reading, like is a secondary kind of, like say, linguistic, system. It's not natural like speech. Speech, like we are, generally, like we say that, like we are human. Speech made us human, but, like probably reading, writing made us, civilized kind of thing, like where everything could be documented and preserved for generation. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm just putting that there. But what I want to say, what I would like to say, like say, speech itself, like a basic function is communication. Nobody can deny that. And then, like say, speech itself, like is a symbolic system. Everybody, I mean, you agree with that. And then, like so when you go to the reading, you go to a secondary, like higher level of, like say, symbolic system. It's like say next level, second. I mean, our thoughts are encoded in the speech, and then, like so when you write it down, that speech is encoded further. So like you see that, like it goes to, the next level of, thing. And but they're like say reading, like as I told you, it is like say it's a cultural kind of thing. It is not, as spontaneously learned as speech, like a child, I mean, would acquire language spontaneously. What one doesn't need to um, what, instruct, like give explicit instructions, like say about, like, how to speak, what to speak kind of thing. But, like for reading, you need some explicit kind of instructions. If you just throw around newspapers or books or novels, Perimeson or, Bhagat's thing, but like it won't really, they won't pick up like reading on their own, right? It needs some, explicit instructions. But, like say that way, reading, like is actually built upon, the spoken language. If the, like say, enriched environment, like say linguistic environment, like would allow the child, like have a lot of vocabulary, for example, what one of the things, like what Professor Rao mentioned it, like in one of the slides. And, that, like many other, linguistic things, because it would help, like say, a smooth transition from, orality to literacy. What, like in Indian kind of situations, like say the basic, like say problem, I mean, I think the crux of, like say problem is, like say we have so many languages, what, like what is, so it is a multilingual, multicultural kind of, society we live in. And it is not, we don't know what is mother tongue. For example, most of the, like all the models and all, come from the West. We try to fit in, often we try to fit in our data into the models or, framework available or developed, like in a different, socio-cultural setting. And, like say, so, but, like so some of, I mean, that, like so we don't know what, I mean, it's very difficult for us many times, like say, to answer a simple question like, what is your mother tongue? We, we don't know what is our mother tongue, like say, what is the, like the first language, second language, kind of. So all these, things, let's say, I think, we cannot, we have to, as I mean, he rightly pointed out, like in somewhere that, like say, we have to, I think, like he mentioned in, like say, we talked about, strategies, like say, strategic needs, like say, to, I mean, need to, I think apply this to our multilingual kind of setting. I think that's what he mentioned. So, but, like, I think it's a really great job, like say what we need to do, like say how to really, go, work out, or, like say, make it, smoother. That is a transition from orality to, let's say, literacy. I mean, obviously then everything, like say, takes it, like as it goes, as he said. But then, like the problem is multilingual society or multilingual thing, like is the one which we need to really look into, like, which I'm not, and I mean, I don't say that I'm an expert on that, but, definitely, I mean, Professor Rao, and like as he mentioned, like say, many people, like say, actually are working in, like say, on that issue. But like say, I mean, even the new education policy also, like say, talks about, like say, there's the term are, again, I'm not going to use any terms, but, like say, they use the terms, which are again bit, I mean, you can actually go this way or that way. I mean, it's a broader term, but, like say, how to really impart, like say, I mean, we know that, like say, I mean, mother tongue education is the best like in the beginning, because like we can relate like learning isn't actually associating or building upon what we already have something. Like say, okay, if it is taught like in the language known, the terms like which are known to the child, obviously like they imbibe, and then I mean they will learn it like say easily. But like say, how to really I mean, that the role of English, which we cannot actually get away without it. I mean, English, whether we like it or not, like it will be there probably. But how to really move from monolingual, or like say only bilingual kind of thing, to multilingual kind of like say interactions in the class, so that like all the languages, as like it's very nice that like say in a class of 45 students, there are 36 languages like in the thing. This is something like what like nobody will think like say in any other country. 45 students with 36 language background, all used all kind of live like in their daily day-to-day kind of thing. So that the part of the thing, like I feel, I mean, I think it's very nice, important for us to think. And also, like say, only last point, like I thought to say is about, like we talk, many people also talked about writing and reading and writing. Like it's reading is a receptive kind of skill, and writing like is more expressive, and generally it is always receptive proceeds, or generally easier slightly than the expressive one. But when it comes to like say reading and writing, and in India especially, like say if you again go to the like look at the models, pedagogical models, like say, I mean, the way it is taught, generally like it is a spoken language, it's taught, yes, it should be, but like it's assumed that it's already there. But otherwise, like what happens is in India, okay, the traditional the procedure is actually like say the teachers like say emphasize equally on writing. In fact, like say older, earlier traditional method was the way in fact I was taught in the school, Kannada, for example, like my mother tongue. I don't know whether I should call mother tongue, but like anyway, it's like say the school language, and where like say it was the very first day, like say we were asked to trace, akshara. Which is said, okay, this is and then you got to say and write and trace. You do all that thing. It's not bad actually, sensory kind of like say approach. More than that, I'm like, what I want to anyway, that's that apart. What I would like to say that is like, it is not, I mean, the relationship or the influence, like say between reading and writing is not unidirectional. It is bidirectional. Both actually like reading influences writing and improves writing, and writing improves like say reading. I mean, like say taking notes, for example, as I was reading something, many times we take notes also, like, like we note down all that. So writing also like definitely, like improves our comprehension, for example, right? So that's, I mean, it's a lot actually. I mean, whatever, I mean, I could not attend all the sessions, but, like say, whatever the sessions I could attend, I really enjoyed. There's a lot, as Dr. again said, this is like say, speaking, like say, at the theoretical level is one thing, and, at the practical level or at the practicing, thing is totally different. But nevertheless, I would always say that, like say, for any practice, successful practice, there got to be a theoretical model, theoretical framework. Thank you. I now over to the organizers. Yeah, Sanjuti.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Professor Giridhar Rao and Professor Prakash Padakanya, for that excellent keynote address and for that excellent sharing.